The front office search is heating up fast, fans are already divided on who they want running the show, and there's a real sense that the organization is trying to figure out exactly what kind of identity it wants moving forward. Some people want stability, others want a fresh voice, but one thing's for sure. This decision is going to impact everything from the draft to the locker room to the team's chances of finally making a real Super Bowl push. So buckle up, because there's a lot to unpack here. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and drop a comment down below. SKOL all day if you're riding with the Vikings no matter what happens this offseason. There's a growing feeling inside the Minnesota Vikings organization that this franchise is about to make one of the most important decisions of the post-Kwesi Adofo-Mensah era. And what makes this entire situation even more fascinating is how quickly everything is accelerating behind the scenes. According to the latest update from Alec Lewis, the Vikings have officially wrapped up the second round of interviews for their general manager search, and sources around the league expect a final decision to come either by late May or early June. And when you really start connecting the dots here, Vikings fans should understand something very important. This isn't just about hiring another executive. This decision could define the direction of the franchise for the next decade, because whoever lands this job is walking into an organization that believes it's ready to compete immediately, but also one that desperately needs stability at the top after a front office era that ultimately failed to fully deliver on expectations. What's intriguing is the timing of this search. Usually, a new GM arrives before free agency, before the NFL draft, before major roster decisions are made. That's not the case here. The roster is essentially built. The contracts have largely been structured. The major off-season swings already happened. That changes everything. Because now the question becomes, are the Vikings truly searching for a long-term architect? Or are they searching for someone willing to fit into a structure that's already being heavily influenced by Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, and ownership itself? And that brings us directly to the name that continues to feel like the favorite internally: Rob Brzezinski. The longer this process goes, the more it feels like the Vikings are leaning toward simply removing the interim tag and officially giving Brzezinski the job permanently. And honestly, from the organization's perspective, there's logic behind it. Brzezinski has been inside the building since 1999. Think about that for a second. He's survived coaching changes, ownership transitions, playoff runs, rebuilds, salary cap disasters, and complete philosophical shifts in roster construction. There may not be another person in the building who understands the internal mechanics of the Vikings better than he does. And one thing that's becoming impossible to ignore is how much respect he has earned for his cap management work this offseason. The handling of expensive veteran contracts, the flexibility built into deals, the ability to move off players without crippling dead money, those are not accidental decisions. That's calculated roster engineering. The Vikings clearly valued flexibility this offseason, and Brzezinski played a massive role in creating it. But here's where things get really interesting. There's a growing belief that if Brzezinski gets the job, it may not necessarily be a massive long-term commitment right away. The discussion around the league is whether Minnesota could approach this more cautiously, potentially giving him a shorter runway while continuing to evaluate the long-term structure of the front office. And honestly, that possibility says a lot about how the Vikings view power inside the building right now. Because if Kevin O'Connell truly has the organizational influence many believe he has, then the GM role may become less about controlling football operations entirely, and more about collaboration, alignment, and execution. That's why every candidate being interviewed suddenly makes much more sense when you analyze their backgrounds. Take Reed Burkhardt from the Denver Broncos organization. This is not some random name thrown into the mix. Burkhardt has deep Vikings roots. He started his NFL career in Minnesota, climbing through multiple scouting positions before eventually becoming director of pro scouting. Then he followed George Patton to Denver, where he helped build one of the league's more quietly impressive roster structures. And Vikings fans should pay attention to what Denver has done recently. Patrick Surtain, Quinn Miners, Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonitto, Riley Moss. Those are impact players found across multiple rounds of the draft. Even more importantly, the Broncos have aggressively extended talent early before prices exploded around the league. That philosophy matters because the NFL's salary cap keeps rising every single year, and smart organizations are realizing that waiting often becomes more expensive than acting early. The Vikings know this. They've watched elite organizations weaponize contract timing for years. And there's another layer here Vikings fans shouldn't ignore. After the adofo-mensah experiment, the analytical, Wall Street-inspired approach, there's a very real feeling that ownership may want to swing back toward a more traditional football structure, more scouting-heavy, more old-school talent evaluation, more football lifers. That perfectly fits Burkhart's profile. But then you get to another fascinating candidate, Terrence Gray from the Buffalo Bills. And this one may honestly resonate emotionally with Vikings fans more than any other name on the list. Because if you go back and look at some of the best draft steals the Vikings have made over the last 15 years, Gray's fingerprints are all over them. Danielle Hunter in the 3rd round, Stephon Diggs in the 5th round, Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith, Xavier Rhodes, Everson Griffin. That's not luck. That's scouting vision. And even though every evaluator has misses, Christian Ponder, Matt Khalil, Laquan Treadwell all get mentioned in the conversation, the sheer volume of successful talent identification during Gray's time with Minnesota stands out immediately. What makes this search so compelling is that every single finalist represents a completely different direction for the franchise. One represents continuity. One represents traditional scouting routes. One represents aggressive modern roster construction. And another may represent Kevin O'Connell's preferred future vision entirely. And the deeper you look into this search, the more it feels like the Vikings are quietly trying to answer one massive internal question. What kind of organization do they truly want to be moving forward? What do you think, Vikings fans? Should Minnesota stay with Rob Brzezinski for stability, or swing big with an outside candidate who could completely reshape the future of the franchise? But then, there's the candidate that may quietly be gaining more traction than people realize. And if this ends up being the direction Minnesota takes, it could signal a massive philosophical shift for the future of the franchise. That's Rams assistant general manager John McKay. And the moment you hear his name connected to the Vikings, one thing immediately jumps out: Kevin O'Connell. This is where the entire GM search starts getting even more fascinating, because whether fans want to admit it or not, Kevin O'Connell is now one of the most powerful figures inside the organization. The Vikings gave him a major contract extension. Ownership clearly views him as the long-term face of the franchise. And even if Minnesota struggles this season, it's hard to envision a realistic scenario where O'Connell is suddenly on the hot seat. That changes the dynamic of this GM search completely. Because now, the Vikings aren't simply hiring a football executive. They're hiring someone who must work hand-in-hand with O'Connell for potentially the next 5 years or more. Chemistry matters. Shared vision matters. Alignment matters. And that's exactly why McKay's name is so intriguing. The Rams organization has quietly become one of the smartest roster-building operations in football. Everyone remembers the flashy trades: Matthew Stafford, Jalen Ramsey, the F-them picks mentality. But what often gets overlooked is how incredibly well Los Angeles drafts outside the first round. That's the real engine behind their success. Even after trading premium draft capital for years, the Rams kept finding contributors in rounds 2, 3, and 4. That's how championship-caliber rosters survive. That's how sustainable contenders are built. And Vikings fans know this team desperately needs that kind of drafting consistency moving forward. Because here's the harsh reality in today's NFL. First-round picks alone are not enough anymore. In fact, around the league, many executives privately admit that the NFL draft becomes increasingly unpredictable after the top 15 selections. Once you hit day 2 and day 3, you're talking about projection, development, scouting conviction, coaching fit, and organizational infrastructure. That's where great organizations separate themselves. And every finalist connected to this Vikings job has one thing in common. They come from franchises known for identifying hidden gems. The Broncos, the Bills, the Rams, the Seahawks. That last one may actually be the most fascinating of all, Nolan Teasley. Because when you study the Seattle Seahawks over the last decade, you're looking at one of the greatest examples of draft-based roster construction in the modern NFL. Seattle built championship-level cores through scouting, through development, through finding stars outside the obvious ranges of the draft. Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, DK Metcalf, Tariq Woolen, countless examples of late-round value. And inside NFL circles, there's enormous respect for the work John Schneider's front office has done for years. That's why Teasley's candidacy shouldn't be underestimated at all. In fact, there are some who believe he might actually represent the ideal blend the Vikings are looking for. Young enough to bring modern ideas, experienced enough to understand scouting infrastructure, connected enough to align with Kevin O'Connell, and rooted enough in traditional football evaluation to satisfy ownership's apparent desire to move away from the ultra-analytical approach that defined the previous regime. And honestly, when you really analyze everything happening behind the scenes, it feels like Minnesota may be trying to build something far more collaborative than before. Not a GM dominating football operations alone, not a head coach controlling every decision either, but an integrated structure where scouting, coaching, cap management, and roster planning all move together under one shared vision. That's why Rob Brzezinski remaining involved feels almost inevitable no matter who gets hired. His cap expertise is simply too valuable. The Vikings trust him. Ownership trusts him. Coaches trust him. The only question is whether he becomes the permanent face of the front office, or whether someone else arrives above him while still leaning heavily on his expertise behind the scenes. And Vikings fans should also understand something else. This hire may directly influence the next era of the roster more than people realize. Because eventually, massive decisions are coming. Franchise quarterback decisions. Justin Jefferson's long-term competitive window. Defensive identity under Brian Flores. Future extensions for cornerstone players. Potential veteran departures. Cap restructuring. Draft philosophy. All of it ties back to whoever wins this job. That's why this search feels bigger than a normal executive hiring cycle. The Vikings are trying to establish stability after years of organizational uncertainty. And in many ways, this may be ownership's most important decision since hiring Kevin O'Connell himself. What's also fascinating is how divided the fan base already seems. Some fans want stability with Rob Brzezinski. Others want the upside and innovation of someone like John McKay. Some want the proven scouting eye of Terrence Gray. Others are obsessed with Nolan Teasley because of Seattle's drafting success. And honestly, there's a legitimate argument for every single one of them. But one thing feels undeniable now. The Vikings appear committed to building through smarter drafting, stronger scouting infrastructure, and sustainable roster construction moving forward. And if they get this hire right, Minnesota may finally position itself not just to compete for playoff spots, but to become one of the NFC's true long-term powers again. Now, I want to hear from every Vikings fan watching this. Who would you hire as the next general manager of the Minnesota Vikings? And which candidate gives this franchise the best chance to finally bring a Super Bowl to Minnesota? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Smash that like button if you enjoyed the breakdown. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss the latest Vikings news and exclusive updates. SKOL Vikings.